A reading from A Curse of Time and Vengeance, a series of curses novel by Christine Norris. Henry stood outside Alexei Faber's kitchen door. 2 hours ago, the police had taken the machine containing Sophie back to the Webers, which had required a considerable bit of manpower and the unfortunate use of a funeral carriage. Detective Thornton had ordered the house sealed to anyone but police and stated that he would be back to collect the evidence in the lab once daylight had come. Henry's parents, the Webers' best friends, had been waiting when they returned. Henry had retold his story while his mother consoled the heartbroken Marta. It was well past midnight when he slipped away under the pretense of going home to sleep. Instead, he returned to Coulter Street. Thornton had left 2 men to guard the house, but they maintained their position at the front door, only circling around once every 15 minutes. Henry waited in the shadows for them to make their rounds. As soon as they were out of sight, he sneaked to the kitchen door. It was locked, of course, but Henry had come prepared. He slipped a small case from his coat and opened it. Jeweler's tools, appropriated from his father's workshop when he was 12 and carried with him ever since. He selected the tools he needed and slid them into the keyhole. With the careful amount of pressure applied, the door was open. There was a moment he considered that he was breaking the law, but it was at the very bottom of his list of concerns. Henry pushed open the kitchen door and winced at the creak of the neglected hinges. With his steps feather-light, he stepped inside and shut the door. Despite his best efforts, the dusty, bare wooden floor protested his intrusion with squeaks that made Henry skittish. Sneaking about wasn't his usual modus operandi, but extreme situations sometimes called for appropriate measures. Sophie was the risk-taker, sneaking about in boys' clothing, climbing too high in trees, riding horses people said were too wild while her parents called after her, never far away, leading young men on chases through the snow, and look where all of that got her. His heart squeezed painfully at the thought of her lying encased in cold glass like a specimen in a jar. Using his hands out in front of him to avoid any surprises and noisy collisions, it seemed to take hours to get from the kitchen to the parlor, even longer to cross the parlor to the secret workshop's door. Thornton had left it wide open. Henry turned the light switch and scooted inside, pulling the door closed. In the tomb-like quiet, the room looked even more ominous than it had when he first set foot in it. Faber's tools glowed dully in the light, once innocent-looking instruments taking on a more sinister cast. The entire room was draped in gloom despite the illumination. What had been going through Sophie's mind when she was here, alone and afraid? He blocked out the thought. He needed to do what he came to do and get out before he was discovered. What sounded like shuffling footsteps outside the room made him jump with alarm. He listened, hoping the policeman hadn't decided to check the house. He'd closed the kitchen door. Hadn't he? He ticked off 10 seconds in his mind. Nothing. His breath escaped in a whoosh, and he resumed his inspection. What was he doing here, sneaking about like a thief? He needed to find something that could help Sophie before the good detective carted it all away. The tools told him nothing, likewise the odds and ends of machinery on the workbench. Henry scooped up a gear and rolled the teeth across the pads of his fingers. He spotted what he had come for, the stack of blueprints. Thank God the detective had not yet taken them. Slipping the gear into his pocket, he scanned each drawing, flipping to the next, searching for the one he needed. The plans for the machine that kept Sophie prisoner. Edmund Weber had never revealed why Faber had written that he would recognize the machine, but when Henry had looked into Herr Weber's eyes, he knew it was the truth. The machine seemed to require a key to open it before the timer ran out, but Henry obviously didn't have it. He might be able to pick the lock, except there could be a mechanism that would kill Sophie if he did. If Henry had the blueprint, he could probably figure out how to deactivate the contraption. The police would look for Faber, of course. Thornton had declared a manhunt would begin immediately. But Henry wouldn't put his faith solely in the police. He would do anything he could to save Sophie himself. Faber had a great collection of designs, most of which were ridiculous. One was for some kind of automated carriage that didn't use horses to move, another for a clockwork man. Henry snorted in derision. While Faber was brilliant, he was obviously also mentally unstable. As if a man made of brass with clockwork innards could actually do the work of a man made of flesh. None of the drawings looked like the machine that held Sophie prisoner. Damn, it's not here. Henry, frustrated, threw down the pages so forcefully they slid from the top of the bench and onto the floor. One landed on his shoe and he bent to pick it up. The design was of an upright rectangular box about the size of a wardrobe, but with all manner of machinery attached to it. He had passed it over before, but now that he had a second look, the blueprint's title caught his eye. He had to read it 3 times before he was sure it said what he thought. Oh, he couldn't possibly believe all of the other designs at least made some kind of sense, useful things that Faber had merely modified. But this was absolutely impossible. The man put Sophie in a chamber where he believes she will sleep unchanged for 100 years. Clearly, this man's definition of impossible and mine are vastly different. As ridiculous as the idea of the machine was, Henry could not seem to put the page down. He was enthralled by the way the machinery fit together, captivated by the explanations for how things work that Faber had written in painstakingly small, neat hand. Which is why it was so shocking when he felt something cold and, if he had to guess, shaped exactly like the barrel of a pistol pressed against the side of his head. "Hello, chum. I think you need to give that to me."